Hi, everyone. Welcome. We have so many great people on this virtual encore of State of the Race 2023. I wanted to, first of all, welcome everyone. My name is Ann Gemmell, directing policy and advocacy for the 10K Independence Project. This is yet another brainchild of Alex Hillman. And I'm going to kick it to him to start off for where did this come from? So, Alex, you want to just give a little bit of backstory about the founding and when the seeds were planted, that sort of story?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm super glad and proud to have Anna as a part of the team. The 10,000 Independence Project started as a bit of a reaction to, I don't know if folks remember back in 2016 or 2017, there was this little company by a guy named Jeff. It's called Amazon. And Amazon came up with this brilliant and evil plan to get cities to compete against each other for the privilege to be their new headquarters. And we don't really need to talk about why that was a bad idea or how that went, but it did get my gears turning. And one of the big pieces of the Amazon pitch was this idea of bringing 50,000 jobs to the city of Philadelphia. And I think that number was big enough to make a lot of folks, both in City Hall and across the city, believe that they needed to play ball. And my thought process was, well, if that number is big enough to get people to react, how would I bring 50,000 jobs in the city of Philadelphia? And, I start looking at big numbers and breaking them down in small numbers. That's how my entrepreneurial brain works. That's just how my creative brain works. And I thought we can agree that 50,000 jobs is a good thing. One company creating it is about the worst way to do that. And then one company being Amazon is the absolute worst way to do it. What would be better? And what I started thinking about was, well, 10,000 person companies would be nominally better. 5,000 person companies, a little less centralization of power, and so on and so forth. At the other end of the spectrum, 50,000 entrepreneurs isn't the kind of solution and opportunity that our city needs for the problems that we're facing today. So somewhere in the middle maybe was a useful answer. And that if we focus over the same 10 years that Amazon was going to spend creating those 50,000 jobs, if we focus on helping 10,000 people become sustainably self-employed, we help 10,000 people become sustainably self-employed, which is a pretty significant accomplishment unto itself. The second thing is that we look at the way that solo firms grow. The truth is, in 2022, heading into 2023, that's the reality of a lot of the economy, is that solo businesses are not only a big part of the economy, but they're allowing individuals to thrive and support themselves and their families and their communities in ways that maybe didn't make sense 5 or 10 years ago. But statistically, roughly 20% of people who choose to create a self-sustainable job for themselves will go on to hire their first employee. And some percentage of those will go on to hire their second, and so on and so forth. And when you start adding up that sort of snowball effect over the same 10-year period, we project a very conservative 84,000 jobs created in the Philadelphia area. And those are good jobs. Those are quality jobs, working for local companies, local businesses, and working for people who actually invest in themselves, their families, and their communities. And so that was sort of the genesis of the 10,000 Independence Project. And when I originally wrote this sort of pitch, this idea that lots of people loved, including the folks at the Department of Commerce, my stance was, well, we're going to do this with or without the government. And you got to remember, I wrote this in 2018 or so, 2019 maybe, definitely pre-pandemic. And among the many things that we learned during the pandemic is how broken things get a whole lot worse when our government isn't working for us, let alone with us. And a big part of my realization was, as we decided to actually launch 10K and turn it from an idea into a real organization, which we launched back in August, that the policy and advocacy piece, which was such a tiny little sliver of the original pitch, was critical and something that we needed to be organized around. And I reached out to Anne to help me understand what that actually was, and eventually to actually help lead this work. And if this were another year that in history that I had been launching this organization with my colleague Opiola Cola, I think we would be focusing on directly learning how and who is already doing that support, how we align those individuals and organizations around that goal of helping 10,000 people become sustainably independent. But this year, we've got this mayor's race and the backdrop of a city that needs a lot, and it needs more than anything a leader. And so using this point in time as leverage to organize people who care about our city, who care about the backbone of our economy, small businesses, and the future of what that work really looks like is why we've all brought you here today, because ultimately we're putting in the work to understand the landscape of the mayor's race and how we can make sure that whoever our next mayor is, that we've got a voice and that our goals are aligned, because ultimately that's what's most important. So Anne has put together an incredible sort of strategy for us and has taught me a ton about how the race actually works. Now, how politics works. I still don't understand how politics work. And I'm not certain that they do, but how a mayor's race works in the city of Philadelphia. And we're going to share that with all of you, as well as some of the ways that we're sort of analyzing the landscape, the candidates, and doing the diligence to understand who these candidates are, how they align with our goals, and then going forward, really how you can join up with us in learning these candidates and understand this landscape and making sure that our next mayor is working not just for us, but with us, collaborating with us. But also, I'm hoping that we've got folks in the room who, in addition to being interested in the economy and small business, are interested in other really important topics too. And we want to collaborate with you using ultimately these same tools. So this is us sharing strategies, sharing lessons, history and context, and Anne's leadership and guidance and knowledge in the space is some of the best in the city. So I'm thrilled for the opportunity to have her share with you. So a little bit of quick housekeeping before we hand it over to her. As you see on the schedule, there's multiple parts of tonight where we're planning Q&A. We want to give lots of time for conversation. Going to ask folks to make good use of the chat. So if you've got a question, whether that is a clarifying question of something that Anne talks about, or just a how the heck does this work, or what does that mean type question, drop those in the chat and I'm going to queue them up so that we can kind of rapid fire those questions at Anne during Q&A. If you have a more nuanced question that you really want to ask and typing it out feels uncomfortable or just not like the right move, if you want to raise your hand using the Zoom raise hand feature, we'll queue up a couple of those after we run through the rapid fire, get you on screen and let you pick the phenomenal brain that is on Gemmell. So I think that's it for my intro and housekeeping. I'm going to turn it back over to Anne for the majority of the rest of this evening. Tune in, enjoy, you're in for a treat.
Thanks, Alex. Really appreciate that. So let me back up 1 second very quickly. Alex mentioned 2018 as a key point in the inception of this advocacy work and the 10K Independence Project, which is bigger than this advocacy campaign. This is one part of it. But in 2018 was around the same time that I was working on future of work policy in the Commerce Department that Alex mentioned earlier. And some of the macro trends that we've seen in the quote unquote future of work, which that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, granted, one of those important components is a growing interest in independent businesses. I'm personally Gen X, and every generation behind me, no matter how you identify or categorize them, is more and more interested in entrepreneurship and being their own boss. And with technology the way that it is, and the internet exploding, and the long tail, and on, it's more and more possible every single year that goes by for people to understand how to cultivate their own expertise and launch their own business. And so there's a lot of chaos in today's economy with technology outpacing institutional ability to adapt. But there's also a ton of opportunity, and many people are seizing that opportunity and launching their own businesses. This is a growing part of our economy. And unfortunately, a lot of legacy institutions like academia and government are unable to adapt and serve the needs of the labor market and in our economy. So I just wanted to level set and kind of connect to Alex's work in the past and just explain like where the beam started to cross on this stuff was definitely around the future of work. And these trends towards more entrepreneurship are not going anywhere. They're increasing exponentially, especially with COVID as an accelerant to that. More and more people want to create the work-life balance and create the freedom to create the life that they want. So you guys are really getting a lot of fun materials that you can refer back to. So we're going to throw a lot at you in a short amount of time, but you're going to have these documents to refer back to. So Alex, if you could drop the history and context into the chat, which you've already done, thank you very much. I can jump into some of the overview of Philadelphia local elections. First and foremost, critically, Pennsylvania is a closed primary state. What does that mean? So if you are registered not as Republican, not as Democrat, but you're registered as an independent, what a closed primary state stipulates is that you cannot vote for either party if you're registered for an independent. So what we need to understand right at the top is that Democrats essentially pick the next mayor because we have a very skewed Republican ratio in our city. It's about 80 to 20 Democrat Republican. So whoever wins on May 16th, Tuesday, May 16th, mark your calendars now, is primary election day for the next mayor of Philadelphia. That will be the de facto winner. And there's a formality of a general election in November and then an inauguration in January 2024. So we have this very long period as advocates, a full year from January 2023 to January 2024 to build these relationships and make an impact on the priorities of the next mayor, to build relationships and get our vision and our asks in front of every candidate that wants to be the next leader of this city. Another thing to understand is that not that many people vote in these elections. It's really sad. We live in a city of 1.5 million people, but when Jim Kenney defeated State Senator Anthony Williams in 2015, only about 243,000 people voted. So that's literally 15% of the city's population is choosing who the next mayor is. So that's both a challenge and an opportunity. There's such a small universe. Only 243,000 people voted last time. So if we have 1,000 people making noise about an issue, we can have a really outsized impact because a big universe votes, a smaller universe volunteers, an even smaller universe donates. An even smaller universe is knocking on the door to talk to them about specific issues like every month from now until January 2024. So that's the sort of scale of opportunity that we have. In addition, in Philadelphia, major voting factors are race and education level, and also generally and nationally celebrity. We saw it with Obama initially. He was just such a political star that came out of nowhere in 07, 08. He didn't put his time in. He didn't work his way up through the Democratic Party. He just seized upon his mediagenic skills and his celebrity power, and he became a president after only a single term, not even a full term as a senator, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. And then we see the flip side of that with Trump. He was also a celebrity. And we see that all over the place. So celebrity and emotion is a huge part of our elections. Like it or not, that's the reality. But here in Philadelphia, we are a highly segregated city. We are a Black and white city split. But when it comes to voting, 55% of our voters are Black voters. In addition, we have segregated lives. College educated people in Philly tend to hang out with college educated people in Philly, tends to be more white. So that impacts voting patterns. So in general, the more educated you are and the higher your income is, the more likely you are to vote. And we have a significant and vocal and influential, both white and Black professional class in the city that yields a lot of influence and power behind the scenes and can really do a lot. So what does that mean? It means that no candidate, whether they're Black or white, can really get elected without significant cross-racial appeal. Jim Kenney was very intentional. Mayor Nutter was very intentional of appealing to the quote unquote other side of the racial aisle. That's the reality in Philadelphia. And there's major power centers in each Black and white power structure in Philadelphia. So that's a major factor. And then more recently, ever since Bernie Sanders' campaign, we've had a rise of a left of center organization in Philadelphia called Reclaim Philadelphia, and to a lesser extent, the Working Families Party, which is a whole other political party that is yielding power and winning elections. And in fact, Reclaim recently just threw an early endorsement behind perhaps the most left of center candidate in the race at this time, Helen Gemmell. So again, mediagenic skills, celebrity, race really matters, education matters, and understanding the full universe of who votes, it's probably less than 300,000 people that will turn out to vote in May 2023. May 16th, Tuesday, May 16th. So also a lot of national politicos and a lot of money and energy and media attention is focused on Pennsylvania for a lot of reasons. And that will spill over into Philadelphia's race for mayor in 2023. We are going to see a ton of outside money and outside media attention, similar to the New York mayor race. In some ways, Philadelphia's mayor race will have more ripple effect nationally because we are situated in a purple state. And so the leader of this media market is going to influence Pennsylvania politics moving forward. And Pennsylvania politics are critical for national democratic interests and national power structure generally. But that said, the Shapiro-Fetterman race most recently isn't what we want to use to compare or predict or anticipate what's going to happen in May 2023. We want to look at really not the 2015 race, which essentially boiled down to Jim Kenney versus Tony Williams, but we want to look even further back to the 2007 race. That is the most comparable race to this race for a couple of reasons. One, a lot of well-known and established political people are in the race, but not a lot of name recognition either. So in the Nutter race, as you can see on the handout, Mayor Nutter, former mayor, he was then councilman of the Roxborough-Manayunk area. He won. He got to City Hall as our mayor in 2007 with only 37% of the vote. And he was running in a field with a millionaire, just like we have Jeff Brown and Alan Dom now, multimillionaire, Bob Brady, Chaka Fattah, and Dwight Evans. So those were all well-known political characters in the Philly scene with known constituencies of people that had voted for them prior and voted for them repeatedly. And so that's very similar to what we're looking at now, unlike the Kenny Williams race. We're going to see a winner emerge with much less than 50% of the field. So there's not going to be a mandate coming out of this. And so it really dovetails nicely with the 10K independence mantra, which is collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. If the next mayor is wise, they'll come out of the race with maybe 30% of the voters, getting them to the winner's circle. And they're going to have to build a mandate by collaborating with constituencies. We don't know what's going to happen by April or May. Again, like the Kenny race with Williams, there were a lot of people in that field too, but there were different points throughout the primary cycle that winnowed the field down to really two serious contenders by the time April rolled around. Notable, when Nutter entered the race in 2007, he was considered a long shot. And so just keep that in mind as you hear people say, oh, well, this person's the front runner, or this person has a ton of money, or this person here, this person there. Like, this is anyone's race. It is not possible to predict right now. There are too many unknown factors, which we'll get to in a second. But if you scroll down to the next chart where we have listed all of the candidates who announced, Eamon Brown just today made his announcement official. Luckily, I had him on the chart already. But this shows some of their past performance with the electorate in thousands. So right now, a lot of people regard Helen Gem as a front runner. She broke records in 2019 with 108,000 votes. She ran citywide. She's a great fundraiser. She's very mediagenic. Again, as I mentioned, she's left of center. She's already scored the endorsement of Reclaim. But there's a really, interesting field here that can't be discounted. And so one of the question marks, for example, is which of these candidates has great cross-racial appeal? Which one is going to survive opposition research, right? So there are so many unknowns, but this chart is something that you should take some time to digest a little bit later on and think about when you have conversations with the candidates. You may want to ask, like, well, what exactly is the path to victory? Another thing to note about this field is that each of these candidates are sort of in different lanes. For example, Jeff Brown and Alan Dom. They both are white males that appeal to the type of voter who wants to see city government run more like a business, more efficiently. They're very successful business people in their own right. They may or may not understand a business like an independent business, a one person shop. That's another conversation for a little bit later. But they're going to essentially split votes. They are naturally appealing to a similar voter. And with both of them in the race, they're fighting with one another for the same voters at the same time that they're trying to build cross-racial appeal or break into new constituencies with appeal. An advantage, for example, with Alan Domsh, he has run citywide. He has garnered votes from lots of parts of the city, whereas Jeff Brown has never run in a political campaign before. So how much is running a grocery store similar to running a political campaign? We don't know. So we're going to find those things out. And again, there's a lot of very competent and accomplished legislators in the race and our city controller, Rebecca Reinhardt. So they all have accomplishments under their belt, but in the context of a violence crisis, which candidate is going to be able to talk about a track record that is aligned with the top concerns of Philadelphians right now, especially Black Philadelphia? Many Black Philadelphians are living in neighborhoods that are literally under siege. And so every candidate has a different track record that they cannot go back in history and change. They can't build a track record of paying attention to public safety or, preventing gun violence, et cetera. So they each have their strengths and weaknesses going into this. And as I said, there's a ton of unknowns. And so every candidate that has announced, one of the first things that they do is appeal to their base and test their previous donor base to see, are they going to donate and support me in my run for mayor? Because a lot of people have donated to these candidates for council races, but do those same donors feel just as strongly about that candidate to then go in early on a donation as they're running for mayor? For example, it's widely known that Helen Gym and Rebecca Reinhardt are both appealing to white college educated women who care about public schools, right? Both of those candidates are going to have to compete for white college educated women in a city where the majority of voters are Black voters, and of the universe of Black voters, way more than a majority are female voters, and voters generally are average age in the 60s. So all of us who are on Twitter, we're talking to each other. The bulk of voters in the city are generally not on Twitter. Retired age Black females are probably going to decide this election. And so the question is, who is going to be most appealing to some of those constituencies and because of what issues? Lastly, the top issue is gun violence and public safety, naturally, and negativity. We don't know what opposition research is out there, right? We don't know the dirt that each different candidate has on the other candidates. All of them have made some sort of decision about who they think is the front runner or who they think is the candidate to beat. Every campaign has a different opinion about that, and they will spend their opposition research dollars accordingly. And so if they find dirt, when will they use dirt? How would the target of that dirt, respond? Will it strengthen their brand or weaken their brand, turn voters off, or rally voters to defend their favorite candidate? We don't know what's going to happen with opposition research. Now is the time to open up the floor for questions, I believe.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So I have one quick and easy question. That final column of the candidate chart, the plus minus percent. Can you
Yeah.
explain what that
Oh, yeah.
represents?
Yes. So let's take a look at Rebecca Reinhardt. Okay. Rebecca Reinhardt won in 2017 to defeat an incumbent, Alan Bukovitz, with 79,000 votes citywide. When she ran again, more people voted for her. She was unopposed, but look at that jump. That means that more people heard about her, more people voted. And that particular election is particularly low turnout, 2017 to 2020. That is the lowest turnout cycle. But if you want to look at the same thing with Alan Dom, he had 57,000 voters the first time he got elected in 2015. And over the course of his work on council and his pressing the flesh at different events for a number of years, he managed to increase the number of voters that chose him by 17%. Now, again, when you walk into the voting booth and you're voting for at-large council people, you get to pick 5. And so we don't know what's going to happen when a voter walks in and says, I can only pick 1. So a voter that, like, for instance, you walk into the voting booth, it's very possible you could vote for Alan and Derek and Helen and make sure all of them get at-large city council seats. But when they're all running for mayor, no voter can do that. They have to choose one. And so that's why Helen's sort of regarded as a front runner, because she did get the top number of votes in 2019. She had the 3rd ballot position, which is really ballot position is very important, and people find you more easily when you're at the top of the list in the voting booth. But she broke records, and she had the top number of votes out of all of her council colleagues in 2019 in 55 out of 66 wards citywide. But again, she's never run head to head against Rebecca, who also expanded her base. And then, there's limited growth in a council district because there's only so many voters in a council district. So that's a factor that's different than citywide. And then the eyeballs mean that they ran unopposed. They had no opponent. So
Great.
yeah. Any other
Awesome.
questions?
I do. I have a question from Due. Asked, what influence do non-white and non-Black voters have on the mayor's election? Will the Latino and Asian community have an important influence as well?
That's a really great question, because there's been a lot of media recently tracking the steep decline in that particular constituency's voter turnout for the Shapiro-Fetterman. And in Philly generally, we saw almost a 10% decrease in the number of voters who participated in the Senate and governor's race last cycle. And when they drilled down to the data, it was a dip in Latino voters. And a lot of that, I mean, Trump did real damage. He scared people from filling out papers and filling out forms, right? Like there was a fear factor that is still, I think, in effect. That's just my opinion. But with this race, with Maria Canona-Sanchez on the ballot, and also Helen Gemm's been a champion of immigrants, that changes the game. And so that is a question, how strong is personal identity as an influencer in voting? I would say in, marginalized communities, underserved communities, it can be a very strong factor, especially if the candidate has a strong track record of being a champion of immigrant communities, the way that Maria Canona-Sanchez has been, the way that Helen Gemm showed up at the airport and welcomed buses that were sent from Texas to Philadelphia just recently. So it remains to be seen. They can definitely be a factor, and it's more of a thing that we won't know for sure until May 17th, the day after the election. But there's some speculation that, with Maria on the ballot, that she will be able to pull the Latino community in, or be a factor if she decides that she doesn't have a path to victory. If she endorsed someone, she could swing those voters towards a different candidate that has a better chance of winning. So there's a lot that remains to be seen, in this race. It's only 5 months away, but there's going to be a lot of opportunity to pick up your popcorn and watch what happens.
Right. I've got one more quick one, and then we're going to move into the next section. And you touched on this briefly, but can you explain the citywide notation on this chart and the influence that has over each of the candidates?
Absolutely. So Jeff Brown has never run for office. That's why he has no numbers. Eamon Brown is a state representative in West Philadelphia. So he has a distinct geography that he represents, and only 3,000 people voted for him a couple of years ago. Alan Dom, Derek Green, Helen Gemm, and Rebecca Reinhart are at-large city council people, which means that they are elected by the entire city. So they don't have a geography that they focus on. Like, for instance, I live in South Philadelphia. My city council person is Mark Squilla. When I go in to vote for district council person, I vote for Mark, and then I can also choose up to five candidates for city council at large. And the at large folks are the top 5 vote getters, and they're tasked with not a particular geography or set of neighborhoods, but the interests of the whole city. And so That notation citywide means that they have experience running a campaign citywide and they have been elected. They've succeeded at that campaign, but they're also one of five. Rebecca was the city controller. She's basically like the official auditor of tax dollars in the city budget. She won citywide because that's a citywide office, similar to the mayor, but in an off year with, lower voter turnout. And it's a lesser known office, obviously, than the mayor. So the people who do not have those citywide notations, it means that they represent a distinct geography. So Sherelle Parker is an African American woman who represents Council District 9, which is the northwest part of the city. Maria Canona Sanchez is Council District 7, and she represents Kensington. And, she has dealt firsthand with the opiate crisis. She has many commercial corridors, a lot of small businesses, and she also has some warehousing in the Frankfurt area. So she has a specific set of concerns that she's responsive to that district's need. Those are her priorities. So that's why her vote count is less, because it's a smaller universe of voters that elect her to do her job.
Great, great, great.
So, are people feeling a certain way at this early point in the race? Like, are certain candidates jumping out to you just from the things that you've read in the paper so far, or the things that you already know about a candidate? Before we jump into our analysis, we really want to hear from you in the chat if you have ideas or impressions about different candidates already. And then I'll talk about the scoring rubric that we set up, and we'll show you our opinionated one after you share with us in the chat. And then we'll give you a blank version for using at your leisure.
I'm going to do a little reading of some of the things that I see in the chat. I'm going to leave folks' names out of them since this is being recorded, but I like Rebecca's financial experience related to the city. I'm a little overwhelmed at this point. So many candidates. I feel you in my heart. Helen has my vote right now. Agreement with the overwhelm. Sherelle is very compelling. This is great stuff. Appreciate it, everybody.
Yep.
Opinions about all of the candidates, some positive and some negative. I think that's why it's so hard. And one of the things that Ann and I've talked about, and this is an encore presentation of material that we shared last week. I think a lot of times we don't have the tools to have conversations about candidates. It's, what candidate do you like more than the other? And it's A, framed around a binary, which is not super useful. And B, we just don't have the tools to compare them to each other. And so that's really what we're going to get into in this next section. So some positive and some negative about each candidate feels 1,000% correct. I like Maria because she's very pragmatic, progressive. I'm worried about the financial backing of Eamon Brown and what their agenda for the city may be. That's great. Great stuff. Well, folks want to keep sharing in the chat. That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing, everybody who has so far. And I'm going to put the next link into the chat so folks can open that up. If you want to open that up and make sure it's showing on the same screen as well, that way folks can follow along the doc. Is that cool?
Yeah. Okay. I've done some advocacy work in the past on a number of issues ranging from education policy statewide, pre-K statewide, cannabis decriminalization. I was a part of the Occupy movement and all of the economic justice. We fought for, more progressive city budget, tax policy, et cetera. The list goes on. And what I want to focus your attention on in this chart is not so much the numbers, but the scoring, right? So every candidate and every elected leader has different levels of being a supporter, right? And so over the years, you learn who is against you and who is a champion. And then there's a lot of nuance in between. So if you care about other issues, this is a handy 0 to 5 scale for any issue. It's built on a bunch of experience, and sometimes you learn, unfortunately, where a candidate or an elected leader really is, like after a vote is taken or after legislation is passed. But a champion is someone not just who says the right thing, but who initiates on issues, who leads consistently on an issue. Now, on the campaign trail, every candidate is looking at the same polling. They're going to sound very similar to one another. But what you want to look at and talk to them about are the issues that we've articulated at the top: small business policy, the history of collaboration, and their capacity or interest to challenge the corporate status quo. Those are the three issues that the 10K Independence Project has really drilled down to focus on during this critical civic conversation that the city is having. And so we scored them from champion to opposed. And the 4-3-2-1 is very nuanced, right? So 4 is strong support. They do the walk and they say the talk. So a 4 would follow the champion. They would co-sponsor legislation or come up with their own ideas to enhance an existing idea, that sort of thing. A 3 is like, they could go either way. It depends on other consideration. They're going to say the right thing. They're going to take some small action. So every elected leader, every candidate is going to talk the talk that we want to hear when they're in a meeting with us or when they're in a meeting with your issue group. They want to agree and please as much as possible. So the talk is going to be easy, but the question is like, do they have the walk to back it up? Do they have the track record? Are they, initiating ideas and saying things that are aligned with our issues unprompted, right? Is it a part of their, repeated campaign speech, for example? So there's a lot of 2s and 1s too, where people don't want to be seen as an opponent of us because who can be against small business? But there is such a thing as lip service in the political world where it's some talk, they say the right thing when you're there in the room, when you ask them to say the right thing, but nothing real, no real action. And then 1 is, they really don't talk and they don't do any walking about it, but they're not opposed, but they're not going to really be helpful necessarily unless it's going to happen anyway and they don't want to be left out. I saw this happen with the soda tax in 2016 where all of a sudden people who were very meh decided to vote yes on the soda tax because they knew it was going to win and they didn't want to be scored as like opponent of pre-K and rebuild and community schools. So collaboration is really about their existing relationships with systems leaders. A mayor has to be able to work with the DA. A mayor has to be able to work with the school board. A mayor has to be able to work with the corporate community and the small business community. A mayor has to be able to work with the superintendent. A mayor has to be able to work with the airport. Like there's a lot of big systems all around the city. And right now you see what happens when they don't coordinate well. Like our violence crisis is worse than most other cities in the country because the DA, the chief of police, the mayor, and the police union are nowhere near the same page as one another. Meanwhile, just more blood all the time. It's a crisis of too much ego and not enough collaboration. Like we cannot afford that, in my personal opinion, of having a mayor that cannot set aside ego long enough to collaborate on big, important things that literally could make everybody safer and the city so much better just through setting aside ego. Collaboration, I believe, is the future of leadership is collaborate, collaborate, collaborate. And that's probably becoming evident in some polling based on some talking points that I'm seeing the candidates say already. A lot of candidates are talking about collaboration. But again, the history doesn't lie and their existing relationships and the strength of those relationships are important. For example, Maria and I were really opposed on the soda tax. She was fighting hard against the soda tax. And I wanted pre-K to happen. And I knew the soda tax was going to pay for it. So that we were at odds, strongly at odds in 2016. And last night I went to a candidate forum and she was so gracious and, gave a shout out and acknowledged, she doesn't carry grudge, for example. And many of the candidates are sophisticated people who care about the common good. Other candidates are grudgier and have, more difficulty getting along with other systems leaders and getting things done. So this score is based on purely my experience and my conversations with Alex, very opinionated. So we would encourage you to take the blank version of this chart and run with that and see what you think about that as well. And we should open up the floor, right, Alex?
Before we get to the questions, actually doing our best to define these 3 categories.
Yeah.
Supporting small business policy. You and I looked at stuff. What were we actually looking for in concrete terms? How do we know that a candidate support? Like what actions, what indicators like you have a history of paying a ton of attention to this. And I
Hmm.
don't expect the average voter to go doing that homework. But if I was an average voter wanting
Right.
to understand a candidate's track record and supporting small business policy, where would I look?
So, for example, a number of candidates have spearheaded efforts to make city government processes and tax policy more transparent and easier for a small business to deal with. Maria, for example, and I believe Alan was involved in this, and Derek and Sherelle were involved in an exemption on taxes up to $100,000 in revenue, right? And so there's a complex maze of business taxes that made it very onerous for small businesses to just be compliant, let alone afford the net income tax, the BERT tax, use and occupancy tax, right? It's like a number of taxes that just make it a nightmare for small
Yeah.
businesses to be compliant and afford to be compliant, right? Both of those things. And so a number of people have been responsive to that need. And unfortunately, in this city, large corporations do have an outside influence on the chamber, on city government, and small business interests often get lost in the shuffle or kiboshed if they're at odds with the interests of big business. So, there's property tax issues that Comcast has opposed, for example, and other large businesses have opposed. That's different than small business policy. But there's a short list of recent efforts that have come out of council that legitimately qualify as small business policy separate, because there's a significant overlap very often between the interests of small business and larger corporate interests, but there are some differences. And so there's some on council
Yeah.
that are more responsive in hands of the commercial corridor business. But you know what? We get to
Yeah.
set that agenda. The more unified and coordinated the small business community is, the more responsive the next mayor will be. There's no comparison to Alex Hillman walking in to some office in City Hall and advocating versus a whole organization with a legitimate list, a quantifiable research of who we are, that kind of thing.
The bit that I want to add to this is I think our definition of small business here is really important because the SBI definition includes businesses that are, roughly 500 employees, and that's not who we're talking about. So, our definition of a small business starts with one person. The policy work that's being built around small businesses that are designed to be incentives and support are really started around 10 employees, which every candidate we've spoken to, we've brought that up as a point, and that's going to continue to be a point that we champion, that the size of small shrinks to one, and that we're not only incentivizing people to grow, but we're incentivizing people to start and just be sustainable so that they can support themselves, their family, and their community. And, upper bound, I generally think that a business that's larger than 50 people is not a small business anymore. I run multiple small businesses, and I have a lot of friends who have businesses that size. We have essentially nothing in common. So I would say between 1 and 50, if I was being really a stickler, I'd say more like between 1 and 20, 1 and 25 are really the category. And I'd also say that we're trying to widen the perspective of candidates beyond who they think of when they think of small business, because not just candidate politicians, but anyone on the institutional side, when they hear small business, they think generally one of two things. They think corridor brick and mortar, which is an important category, and we need that for vibrant, safe, desirable neighborhoods, right? And those businesses, in the most literal sense, serve their communities. And then they go to startups, and usually like high growth tech startups, which great, but I don't think that community necessarily needs additional support the way a massive category of 1 and 2 person businesses, people that have started side businesses and they're running them from their dining room table, their spare bedroom. Maybe they've got the luxury of a co-working space, that sort of thing. There are more of those businesses than ever before. That category is growing faster than ever before, and we are effectively invisible to all of the policymakers. And so a big part of our focus, and we're going to talk more about this in the last section, is making sure that all the candidates recognize that this giant category of small business that shrinks all the way down to one person businesses, and the realities that we face and what we want from the city and from all the institutions in our city for that matter. And you spoke at length about the history of collaboration, and that is systems level collaboration, not just that they work nicely with other people. And then I wanted to touch briefly on challenges corporate status quo. In the original version of this chart, that said anti-corporate. And while I'm totally down with that sentiment, realizing it wasn't really what we were looking for in this chart and really in a reflective candidate. And what we wanted is candidates who are not afraid to stand up to big corporations, whether it's a Comcast or whatever the next Amazon is. I think leaders who are willing to stand up to big companies and say, look, you got to be a part of this ecosystem is what that third column is about. Because ultimately, it's not that we don't want big companies. We do. We want to have a good relationship with those companies, which means we need leaders that are willing to stand up to big companies that are trying to be bullies.
I would add that the mayor needs a good relationship with the corporations too, right? And that's a part of the collaboration. Like a mayor can be a convener so that the Aramarks, the Independence Blue Cross, the Comcast, a mayor can bring them to the table with the small business community and coordinate some coherent collaborations, right? That's not happening to the extent that it should be happening, in my opinion, especially this critical time in economic history where there's so much change. Like if we don't respond in more visionary ways, our commercial corridors are going to disappear and become blight. And that's not okay, right? That would be devastating for a city like Philadelphia that is so pedestrian and so based in neighborhoods and has commercial corridors, anchoring us. Like there's so much more potential with collaborations between anchor institutions like Penn and corporate players, like I've already named, and civic associations, 10K Independence Project, and government. Kara asked a question. So splitting the vote has to do with geography, what parts of the city are these candidates from, their race, their appeal, their brand, and their appeal. So Jeff Brown is a white man. Eamon Brown is African-American man from West Philadelphia. Alan Dom. Jeff Brown and Alan Dom and Rebecca Reinhardt are all white, all going to appeal to people that want fiscal responsibility. They want efficiency. They want the city of Philadelphia to not be a hot mess. They want it run properly. Their operations, right? The people who care about picking up the trash and filling potholes and getting things done in a way that makes sense. That type of voter is probably going to be thinking about Jeff Allen or Rebecca. Sherelle Parker's an African-American woman. Marie Canona Sanchez is Puerto Rican. They may or may not split votes with one another. But if the priority is a woman like me, a woman I can see it to be it, person of color, strong, charismatic leader, those two fit the bill. They may or may not split votes with one another. Helen and Rebecca, as I mentioned before, are going to split votes with one another. It's really, there's a lot of nuance in the Democratic Party citywide. And so the Roxborough voter is very different from the West Philly voter, right? We are a city of neighborhoods. And also Derek and Sherelle are both from the Northwest Coalition, which was critical in getting Jim Kenney elected. There was cooperation between South Philadelphia power players and the Northwest Coalition power players led by Marian Tasco and Dwight Evans, right? So they had an agreement to help one another. And that was critical to Jim Kenney's victory. Now we have Derek and Sherelle both coming out of the Northwest Coalition. So it remains to be seen if they're both viable, if they're going to split that really strong, powerful base of Black professional voters, church-going voters, business people in the Northwest. That's Sherelle country and it's Derek country. So we don't know how this is going to shake out. There's going to be a lot of change over the next couple of months. A lot of possibilities. I hope that answered your question, Kara. That's a really pretty advanced political chit chat.
Before we move into the next section, I think I want to reinforce the goal that we had with this tool. As someone who came into this with effectively zero understanding of the political landscape of this moment, of how the race works and who these candidates are, this was a conversational tool and a learning tool. I have the benefit of Anne's world of experience as well as the network that she has. But even without that, I think just having this as a tool to have a more nuanced conversation than who I like more than another. Like, if I'm totally honest, I'm looking at this graph right now. I still don't have an answer. This is anybody's game. And I think the key is we're going to revisit this chart between now and May and would encourage you to do the same. So In that PDF that we linked in the chat, and I'll drop it again just for anybody who's come in and perhaps lost the chat, grab this, download it, and use ours as inspiration. It's not fact. It's loaded with opinion. Ultimately, great voters form their own opinions. How? Well, you read and maybe you go to forums and you learn and you listen to candidates speak. But I also think that one of the things that's missing is we don't have the tools to learn from our families, from our friends, from our communities. And so, whatever size or scale that looks like to you, if folks are wanting to have a conversation about the candidates, my hope is that this tool and our model as a reference gives you a way to just start filling in these numbers based on your gut instinct now. And as you get more information, change those numbers. They're
Hmm.
supposed to change. That means you're learning new things. And also, if you don't know how to fill a thing in, I feel like that's a great prompt for like, well, how do I find that out? And our hope is that we can be one of the many resources in the city. We can point you to something that'll help you understand the question that you have. And again, realizing that we picked our three issues, so to speak, here. But if you were focused on, on gun violence, you're focused on racial equity, you're focused on climate justice, pick your three. And three, it was a strategic guidance from Anne as well, because having three kind of forces you to figure out your priorities and those kinds of things. So
Yep.
if you're into small business and economic development, borrow these, modify them for yourself. And if you want to have this conversation in other contexts, that's great too.
Yeah, I would only add, and I want to qualify, no offense to anyone on this call, but we're all a little bit of a weirdo set because we're plugging into the mayor's race a little bit early, right? And we are talking about policy and talking about a way to evaluate the candidates. But so much of voting, as I mentioned earlier, is emotional. And right now, the city is emotional and rightly so around gun violence. And so every candidate has the word safe, 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 safer, safer, safer. And that's because the crisis that we're in right now, typical average voter may be looking for a law and order candidate. And it's pretty hard for certain candidates with certain backgrounds to be that law and order candidate right now. Right. And so for a lot of us, that is a repelling idea. But again, looking back at 55% of the electorate is African American, and we are in a gun violence crisis. And white Philadelphia is experiencing that gun violence crisis very differently than Black Philadelphia is. And so we can talk about policies and we can talk about rational, wonky things a lot, but just remember that voting is an emotional act at the end of the day. And there's certain issues that are going to gin up more emotion and more motivation to vote for different people. It's going to hit different people differently.
There was a couple of questions in here that we did not specifically get to. There was one about policy distinctions that the city could adapt to or adopt to create definitions around small business.
Mm.
And then also Michelle's question about a chamber for small business. I want to talk more about those, I think, in perhaps a different context. I think the next section we're going to focus on is how we're organizing asks now, as in like pre-election day during the race, so that we can then be asking for these very specific policy things after somebody is elected to govern our city. So like keep those questions. And Michelle, you and I should talk more about that chamber for small business, because that's precisely what I want to do with 10K as a collaborative effort across this other smaller affinity chambers. Basically, I would love for us to be a thread through all of the small chambers so that when folks walk in a room, there's other small businesses like them. But if any other folks are interested in that, let's follow up about that after today's call. And since I'm watching the clock and I know we've got
Yeah.
left to cover, I think we should encourage
Yeah.
folks to read the deeper dive on 10K on their own time.
Yep. Okay, great. While Alex is sharing the PDFs in the chat, we're starting to meet with candidates now and talk to them. So far, several candidates have been super responsive. We haven't reached out to everyone yet, but we just talk about some of the pain points of independent businesses, how there's like an invisibility problem with a growing sector of the business community, the independent business. And basically, what we want, big picture, is the next mayor to work with people that want to solve problems for this community of independent business people. with us, not just for us. I experienced how this can work when I designed the pre-K initiative. I did not design that and then tell the pre-K community how it was going to be. No, just because I worked for the mayor doesn't mean it precluded me from collaborating with so much rich expertise in the early childhood education community of people who were teaching pre-K classrooms, running childcare centers, doing policy at the state and national level. So there were big collaborative tables to design that program. And so, and that sort of faded away. And that definitely didn't happen so much when it came to the business community and how could this past mayor serve small businesses better. And so there's an opportunity here to just say out of the gates, we want you to collaborate with us now on the campaign trail to help us share the stories, because there's this version of entrepreneurship that is not the reality of most Philadelphia entrepreneurs, certainly not the reality of the independent community, right? There's a lot of education that needs to happen in the policymaking class and civic leaders about how many different kinds of novel businesses there are that are being operated very sustainably, if not building wealth in Philadelphia. And what do those independent businesses do in their communities to make their communities better, to enhance the quality of life of the neighborhoods? So we want the candidates to share the stories and validate this version of entrepreneurship and learn more about these so many different kinds of business models that are out there and thriving, and also the methods for helping people there's tried and true methods of taking one person's ambitious idea and turning it into a sustainable, good job for themselves, a good business. And then while governing, of course, we want the collaboration to continue. So, like in life, right? Build good relationships before you need them. Well, on a campaign trail, there's no better time to have your voice heard than when candidates need your vote and want your money and want your volunteer hours, right? Their ears will never be as big as they are now. Their hearts will never be as open as they are now. Their spirits will never be as generous as they are over the next 5 months before they are really looking to scrap, especially in a field with so many competitors. Every single vote is going to count. So this is the time you can really distinguish yourself as a voter by giving time, money, attention, your expertise to build a relationship with any number of candidates. You don't have to just pick one. In fact, we're not picking one. We're not an endorsing body. We're going to encourage all of you to go out and engage with these messages, with this background knowledge, ask good questions, build relationships on behalf of 10K, bring expertise back, like put a bunch of dollars on a bunch of horse races. That's what's going on right now. But now is the time. And so the more unified and consistent the messages are from as many people as possible to as many different candidates, the greater the chances are that we're going to have a very good, established, and collaborative, keyword collaborative, relationship with whoever lands on the second floor of City Hall in January 2024. So this is the time to build the relationship. And it'll just get harder and harder past the 100-day phase. Even people who helped Jim Kenney get elected after the first 3 or 4 months, his circle was very tight. His circle was very small. It was very hard to get through to his cabinet folks. Everybody just gets very overwhelmed with reacting to fires and everything else. So, now's the time to build that relationship and to really increase your chances of influence and collaboration over the next 4 years from 2024 to 2028. Imagine that. So this is a really critical race, I believe, for Philadelphia and our future. Okay. So we have a quick chart of different milestones. Basically, from now, as I mentioned, from now till December 31st is a really critical time. Like if you feel strongly about a candidate now, and you give them $100, will make a strong impression. Even, of course, they want bigger checks than that, but not everybody can do that. But if you show some love on social media or write a check or show up to a fundraiser or offer to do a house party, it is an unforgettable thing that can really help establish a good relationship now till December 31st, especially those early donors are really important. And then also there's that financial deadline. And then in February, from the 14th to March 7th, every candidate has to secure at least 1,000 unique registered Democrat signatures to get on the ballot. So it's petition time. It's in the dead of winter. It's a finite time. And that's a major metric. It's a major test of a campaign's ability to put people in the field and pull results back, right? So looking at how many petition signatures each candidate collected, all of them will far exceed the 1,000 signature requirement, but it's a test of their operations. It's a test of how many people feel strongly enough about this candidate to go volunteer in the dead of winter and knock on doors and collect a sheet of 50 petition signatures from friends and neighbors that are verified they're Democrats. So, and they have to be unique. So if someone comes to my door and says, I really love Amen Brown, I sign right here. And then someone else says, I really love Jeff Brown, can you sign right here? If I sign both of those petitions, my signature doesn't count for either of the candidates they're struck off. So it's a whole process it's a real test of a candidate's support and their field operations. And again, the media cycle will be increasingly hard to track as opposition research surfaces and criticisms get hurled all over, and you'll want to tune out, but we'll be here to help sort through and pull out the highlights and kind of analyze a little bit of the significance of what's going on throughout the next 5 months. Also, keep in mind the field will narrow. The fundraising deadline, who's raising money, who's wasting money, that happens a lot. And then also you can raise a lot of money and then waste a lot of money on people that don't know the Philadelphia political landscape very well. And that remains to be seen, especially with people who haven't run a citywide campaign before or haven't operated a campaign at all before. And also the independent expenditures. There'll be a couple of big endorsements. We already saw Reclaim endorse selling Gem. There's a lot more endorsements to come. The AFL-CIO is a group of labor unions. SEIU may or may not be behind that with that labor table. Their service workers union. They're a little more progressive than other unions. There's the Building Trades Association. There's the PFT. There's the police union. And that's a real X factor, right? And in a city where the top issue is violence and public safety, how can a candidate be law and order and not alienate the police union? Or how can a candidate in a progressive city get the police union's endorsement? And it's going to be a really, really tricky high wire act for a lot of the candidates to navigate. And so a lot of those endorsements matter. They come with money. They come with boots on the ground. They'll come with commercials on TV. So we don't know how any of that's going to play out at the moment.
And I especially want to highlight the folks who have asked questions in the chat in the last few minutes about getting involved. That's really exciting for us because ultimately that was what we were hoping to see. If you are digging sort of our philosophy and approach and some of these issues, we want to talk to you. Even if your interest is in other corners of advocacy, we want to be collaborators with you as well. So the follow-up from today's event will include all of these PDFs along with a transcript and recording. We're going to have a version of this online. So folks who couldn't attend live are going to be able to tune in to this information as well. And since we know we're heading into the holidays and everyone's going to need some time to decompress, we're also, I like just the last little bits and pieces to make it easy for us to communicate things like what events are coming up that we're going to, what things we can do to coordinate when we go, even if it's little things like having a 10K pin or sticker or something like that, or putting that on your phone or laptop or notebook. Because ultimately, one of the things that I've learned and Anne can affirm is it doesn't take a lot to be coordinated if we agree on some core issues that we care about. And ultimately, I think hopefully everyone in the room can agree, even if your business is not your core interest, that having a mayor who collaborates with us is important. Then we agree on something, and we should be going to these events together and supporting each other and showing up as a unified set of voices. And one of the lessons, many lessons I've learned here is the example I think you shared previously, Anne, of the labor unions split their own vote because a bunch of different sets of unions decided to endorse a bunch of candidates and then none of them won. And then they freaked out And the next
Yeah.
time around, they said, you know what, that's never going to happen again. So we can learn from somebody else's mistake and be a unified voice. And asking our leader to be collaborative, we're gonna show them how we do it. We're going to invite them
Yes.
to be a part of our process as much as we show up and participate in theirs.
Back to where we started. It's a big city, but it's a relatively small universe of people that will be highly engaged and tracking this the way that people on this call are going to be tracking it. So, this strategy of being in the same room where media and candidates and other highly engaged voters are, and having conversations with the other voters in that room and wearing a 10K button or sticker or whatever, highly effective because the candidates and the media see that we are having conversations about our issues with other people that are guaranteed to go vote on May 16th because they're engaged. The other wonderful thing about this political cycle is that the Lenfest Foundation is putting $1.5 million out to various media outlets to make sure that Philadelphia is informed and engaged. So they're going to do events. They have a website dedicated to tracking those events. So someone else is organizing the calendar for us of media events and forums and everything else. So it's a beautiful thing and it's worked in the past. Like the Pre-K for PA campaign that I was the field director for in Southeast PA, we did this strategy all across Pennsylvania. Governor Wolf didn't even understand really the value of early childhood education, but he kept seeing these Pre-K for PA people everywhere at every event he went to. And by the time he was sworn in as governor, he was committed and he ended up adding over 100 million more dollars over the course of his tenure as governor to the early childhood education space because the constituency of people that cared about it were well organized and in the right rooms at the right time. And that's exactly what 10K should be doing from now till May and then from May till November as well.
Ultimately, the offer here is when folks want to do stuff and it aligns with our goals, we want to be collaborators. I think the last two questions we have are a great note to end on, and you can explain this better than I can. Does 10K have a plan to endorse a single candidate as we near voting day? Answer that, and I'll wrap up with part two.
I'm so glad that question came up because there's legal implications and it gives us a chance to explicitly state that we are not an endorsing entity. We are not a political action committee. That's a whole other legal ball of wax that we are not. We are actually pretty unique in what we're doing is that we're working together as like a herd, right? That we're going to move and read the field and hopefully it will become apparent that the 10K community may get down to one or two candidates. We don't have a problem with that. We want everybody to be engaged and supporting a candidate that they feel good about. And our goal is to be so well organized that every person who has a shot of winning on May 16th, whether it's one, two, three, or four candidates that are in the final stretch, that they're all committed to collaborating with the 10K Independent Project. And they've all shared stories of these types of business models that we all are familiar with, but they're not familiar with. So the whole thing is really an education opportunity. And the goal is that in the final stretch, in the last week of GOT weekend, we may have some 10K independence people that are ride or die for Sherelle Parker. And we might have a camp of 10K people that are ride or die for Ellen Don, right? If they're both in the final running, it's a win-win for us because we've built relationships with both camps. I just picked those names randomly, but yeah, we're not going to endorse a specific candidate, but it will become apparent down the home stretch. I think the field will narrow and there'll be some natural enthusiasm and affinity as the cycle plays out.
Yeah. And the only thing I want to add to that is that if we think about what post election day and even like pre-inauguration looks like, the goal is hopefully the candidates we're picking from aren't going to make Philadelphia worse, they're going to make it better. And we've built the relationships and the trust so that in that window between election day and inauguration, we get to be a part of the discussions around economic policy and beyond because we showed up, they recognize our names, they see us as collaborators before and after election day. So we've really strategically chosen asks up front that they might seem unambitious. That's not an accident. They're strategically chosen to build trust in relationships. Every ask is a two-way street to show that we're going to show up with them if they show up with us.
Right.
Because the people who do that are the people that we're going to be able to work with as a community most effectively after they're elected. So that's the big picture strategy. I think it's as close to a no lose strategy as we could possibly engineer. And another outcome here is if we do a good job as a community, we're better about talking about our local elections. We're better at engaging with our local communities and helping them understand who our electeds are. So when there's another big run of council candidates, we're running effectively the same kind of playbook. This is not a one and done. This is about a first domino in what we hope is many years of a better administration for our city.
Yeah, I mean, it takes years. Pre-K for PA launched in 2013, and they're still going. And they have great relationships with Shapiro going in. So this is not a 6-month effort. This is just the start. And in our efforts to engage with the different candidates, you, it, all of you will learn things about that campaign. You will learn things about that candidate. Are they running a good ship? Are they responsive? Are they dismissive? Like we'll learn things, we'll catch signals in the course of trying to collaborate with them on the campaign trail.
Fantastic. Well, I am just trying to get my computer to behave and share our closing screen, which really just says thank you. So many folks came and were here for the whole time, which always is a kind of a feat with online events. So your time and attention is really appreciated. And most of all, a big thank you to Anne for putting all this together and both teaching me and then giving us this opportunity to pass that along to all of you. So this was great. Super
Yeah.
appreciated. And to beginning of more great stuff to come, watch your inboxes and we'll see lots more of a bunch of you, I hope, in the
Thanks,
beginning of the new
Alex.
year.
Great to work with you too, Alex. True team effort.